Welcome to Spotlight, where we usually discuss some of the topical issues of the day. Media these days has been discussing about Trump's tariffs, with India being imposed 45% tariffs on all its goods exports to United States. Let us try and see what are some of the limitations and leverages that India has in addressing that challenge, and how India is likely to address that challenge, or how is India addressing that challenge as of now. First thing important to understand is that the language, harsh language, that President Trump uses in his tweets, or the deadlines that he keeps announcing, are not uniquely focused on India. He's been conducting exactly similar foreign policy with all his other friends, allies, adversaries, competitors, enemies, and everybody else. Indeed, India has not received the worst language when it comes to President Trump's tweets about India or Indian leadership. Second thing important to understand is that the 1st August deadline, which is now 7th August in terms of exports from India to United States, because those goods in transit are not going to be impacted as it is mentioned here, is only a deadline as far as unilateral imposition of tariffs from United States is concerned. There is no similar deadline on India-US trade negotiations, which are continuing and might end up resolving some of these irritations. And if you see the trade agreements that President Trump has signed with several countries, from Japan to UK to European Union to Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, and so on, the tariffs have still been imposed by United States on its imports from these countries, but their range has usually been between 15 to 20%. Compared to some of the other nations that have now been, from 1st of August, imposed up to 50% of tariffs in case of Brazil, or 40% in case of neighboring Myanmar, or let's say 25% in case of India, 35% in case of Canada. It is a range, and in that range, India is not the worst recipient of hike in tariffs, which are already imposed by United States. Third thing to understand is also the fact that there are already questions within the United States being raised, and there are lawsuits being filed in federal courts, whether the national security framework within which President Trump is invoking 1978 international emergency economic powers of the president, whether that can actually be invoked to have such sudden hikes in American imports from other countries. And that is partly driven by the fact that the increased hikes would mean increased prices for American consumers, whereas the tariffs, of course, will go to the government. So in that sense, there are already concerns within the United States, and likewise concerns with all 90 plus trading partners of the United States, who are then looking at what could be alternative destinations for their exports, which might become less competitive when it comes to exporting to United States, which of course is world's largest importing country, and therefore important destination for all these countries exporting goods to United States in that sense. But in that sense, when these countries feel that their exports to United States are going to be more or less competitive, they start looking at other possibilities. For example, India's garment exports to United States will now be impacted upon by competitors like Bangladesh, Vietnam, or even Indonesia, which will have lower tariffs compared to 25% tariffs of India. And in that sense, India will have to look at what are alternative destinations for India's apparel garment exports that could be. One easy comparison that comes to mind is that United States imports about 80 to 90 billion dollars of garments every year, in which India's share of exports is roughly between 12 to 15 billion dollars. On the other hand, the collective European Union imports over $200 billion worth of garments and apparels. And India's export share right now is only $5 billion or so. Now, if tariffs in case of European Union are going to be less compared to tariffs on India's exports to United States, then some of these exports could be diverted to European Union. And in that sense, India's FTA with UK should accelerate India's FTA with the European Union to bring tariffs even lower and therefore find alternatives to where India could export. In same manner, India could also explore possibilities of expanding exports to, say, Middle East or West Asia, to Southeast Asia, to Africa. Indeed, China could be another possibility because we have often second or the largest trade with China. But in this case, China's exports to India are usually much more, $110 billion or more, whereas India's exports to China are roughly between $50 to $21 billion. And that is a very imbalanced trade, and one could then explore possibilities of enhancing India's exports to China as well. Beyond that, India could look at also domestic market to enhance domestic consumption of our production. And one could do that by facilitating India's manufacturing sector. So we could have more reforms and more incentivizations as part of Make in India, where India could, for example, see that regulations could change in such a fashion that inputs that go into making of India's exports could be made easily and in terms of cost-effective manner made available to manufacturers in India. India's manufacturing sector in any case needs a major push because services is the one that provides 50% of India's GDP in that sense. So here one is also conscious of the fact that when we talk about India-US trade, these tariffs and the whole discussion is limited to only goods exports to United States. And when it comes to services exports, which is also equally significant, there is a trade surplus with the United States, and therefore President Trump is not talking of tariffs on India's services exports to United States. Indeed, 65% of India's total services exports to the world are in United States, and I think 11 to 15% again in Europe. So that is not impacted as of now. So that part of the trade really remains solid and beneficial to both sides. So what India could do are fundamentally look at making Indian exports more competitive, exploring other countries as destinations, enhancing domestic consumption. India could also look at possibilities of World Trade Organization, for example. There have been examples of India taking some of these issues to the appellate body of World Trade Organization. But the trouble here is, or the difficulty is, that the World Appellate Body right now doesn't have, it has actually just one judge now, and appointment of judges at the appellate body has been kind of restrained by United States itself. And appellate body doesn't even have the quorum to deal with some of these dispute settlement issues that India might take to WTO. But India and the United States last year in March had also resolved some of these issues which they had taken to WTO, but since the appellate body was not functioning, they resolved them on their own in that sense. So since the bilateral trade negotiations are continuing, it's likely that both sides will find ways and means to rearrange these tariffs and could bring these tariffs down to somewhere between 15 to 20%, just like United States has done with other countries where it has been able to sign a trade deal. The likelihood of that increases because compared to President Trump's very harsh language in his tweets when talking about India, particularly his new found engagement with Pakistan or his newfound anger with India's imports of defense equipment and oil from Russia. Other members of his team have indicated slightly a variance in their tone to engaging with India. For example, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has underlined that India remains a very important strategic partner of United States. Likewise, Vice President J.D. Vance was the one who was in India when the framework of this bilateral trade agreement was agreed upon. So there are other voices that understand that India is a significant trading partner, one of the top 10 trading partners of United States. Not just that, India is already the fourth largest economy according to World Bank and IMF, and also according to these international bodies, the fastest growing economy among major powers. So it's likely that they will find India to be an attractive trading partner, a very attractive market for American exports. And India had made those gestures right from the beginning. In fact, India has been very proactive in engaging President Trump from January 20 itself, as in the inauguration of President itself, Indian Foreign Minister was present there. And in the budget of February this year, India had made gestures of symbolic reduction in tariffs in American exports of apples, of almonds, and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And since then, India has constantly been engaged. Indian Prime Minister was in United States and had a meeting in the White House in February, where I understand that several gestures were again made of enhancing America's defense equipment exports to India, whether it is Predator drones or it is F-35 fighter jets and so on. And likewise, also India perhaps had made a kind of a gesture of importing much more of American oil, and I think media had even indicated $25 billion of annual oil imports from United States, which are offers which India has made. In fact, even in the sensitive agriculture sector, India has agreed to enhance import of American soybean, partly because India doesn't produce too much soybean and America is a major exporter of soybean. So there are multiple varying voices from United States and also multiple varying concessions and offers that India has made, which should make it possible that sooner or later we have different kind of indications that whether before end of this month, August 2025, or by September or October, the bilateral trade agreement is likely to be concluded, and we might see these trade tariffs of United States, which are currently at 25%, coming down to the average level, like the other trading partners of United States who were able to sign a trade deal, which is between 15 to 20%. And meanwhile, India could also gear up to make Indian exports more competitive. There is a possibility of some of the Indian firms also facilitating American president's concern about onshoring manufacturing to make American exports more competitive. There are all kinds of possibilities, but I think the fundamental truth remains that we also need to understand that these anxiety-driven tweets and knee-jerk reactions of American president have some genuine reasons as to why he's so paranoid about American economy and its world trade. Currently, America's world trade suffers about nearly $1 trillion worth of trade deficit, $1 trillion worth of trade deficit. And the major thing that makes it more sensitive is the fact that America's main adversary, China, has exactly the opposite, nearly $1 trillion of trade surplus, which makes China has enormous system-shaving powers, as we say. Likewise, America's debt has been rising. It is now more than 133% of American GDP, which itself is large, about $28 trillion. And that is what drives such anxiety and angry tweets of American president. Of course, his main concern has to be China again, where American trade deficit remains nearly $300 billion. But it's also true that the trade deficit with India has also in last 5 years grown. and risen from about 17, 18 billion dollars to now $45 billion. So there are genuine concerns that American president has, which makes him push a hard line on tariffs on all other countries. But of course, these have been norms and mechanisms and arrangements where tariffs on United States side were always lower because relatively advanced economies have more capacity to absorb that kind of tariffs by other countries which are relatively poor and developing. So partly it is also true that by taking such knee-jerk, paranoia-driven initiatives of suddenly increasing tariffs on all its trading partners, United States has also over a period of time begun to undermine all the institutions, norms, arrangements, mechanisms that actually undergirded the United States global leadership. So in the short term, yes, one could see that these policies might deliver. United States might see certain advantage in terms of collecting more tariffs on all exporting countries that export products to United States. But in the long run, whether it will be useful to see growth in American economy, or whether it is going to make American exports more competitive, and even deeper question whether it is going to not undermine American global leadership, are issues that remain to be seen in the long run. But in the short run, I think the way negotiations between India and the United States are going, there is a possibility that their bilateral trade deal would bring down the tariffs on Indian goods exports to the United States to roughly the same as with some of the other countries that have signed similar deals, which is between 15 to 20%. Your feedback on our discussions are most welcome, and we look forward to continuing this conversation on many more topics in coming weeks and days. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.